Hello, welcome back. Today I'd like us to have a look at a response video. I discovered the video on Dr. Winter's YouTube channel. The video is produced by SJW101, or Eric is Awake. Its title is Baring Repeats the Fake News of the Daily Mail. In the video he mentions several YouTubers, neolplum, Baring, Karen Strawn, but I think it's safe to say that his criticism is aimed at Baring in particular and Daily Mail readers in general. The issue in question relates to the British Medical Association and its advice that pregnant person should be used rather than pregnant mothers. Now, this video is not a defence of Baring or the other YouTubers. They are well capable of defending their own positions, so I won't presume to do that. What I will do in this video is to make some observations in relation to how the argument was presented by SJW101 or Eric, because when we view the content of his channel, he does present as a defender of intellectualism, whatever that is, and of course claims the mantle of skeptic. Eric is awake, and the image that he used in this video makes obvious reference to Eric Blair, who most people would know as George Orwell. So just like Eric, I won't resist the temptation to use a sprinkling of Orwellian quotes when I think it's justified. When we look at the titles of the videos on his channel, it becomes plain that he is interested in countering what he perceives as anti-intellectualism and promoting skepticism. And having already viewed this particular video, he does make a good argument, at least for a feminist. But that bar is not set very high, and there are quite a few issues with how he constructs his argument. I will address only the first half of the video because I believe that to be most relevant. And as Eric is both an intellectual and a skeptic, I'm sure he will welcome my critique, so let's begin.
Greetings, netizens of YouTube. It's likely come to your attention that one of the favoured sources of anti-feminists and the anti-SJW community on YouTube is the British Daily Mail. It won't surprise anybody familiar with the press to know that the Daily Mail has a long history of inaccurate reporting, clickbait headlines, celebrity drivel, and upon providing its readers with a dumbed-down version of the news with a right-wing perspective. In fact, just days ago, Wikipedia decided to remove the Daily Mail as a reliable source to be used to support its entries altogether. Wikipedia editors pointed to, quote, the Daily Mail's reputation for poor fact-checking, sensationalism, and flat-out fabrication, unquote. Other media outlets such as Russia Today and even Fox News and many other right-leaning publications are still used by Wikipedia, just before anybody feeds into the right-wing media persecution narrative. So, a couple of days back,
Now the first thing Eric does is deploy the well poisoning strategy. Obviously I've watched this video, so I know the basis on which he will launch his criticism, and it rests heavily on the credibility of the Mail itself. In this part of the video he ensures that the viewer is left in no doubt about the pernicious nature of the Daily Mail. But what you might not have noticed in all the excitement is that he was not referencing a single publication. He referenced three distinct publications: the Mail on Sunday, the Daily Mail, and the Mail Online, all of which he refers to as the Mail. You might think that making such distinctions is somewhat pedantic, but I know that Eric disapproves of oversimplification, and they do have editorial styles. In fact, the relationship between the Mail on Sunday and the Daily Mail could be described as somewhat antagonistic, so we don't want to dumb down unnecessarily, do we, Eric? He uses the editorial ban enforced by Wikipedia as evidence of the Mail's unreliability, but this is entirely unconvincing when we consider the track record of Wikipedia itself in this regard. At this point, I could list many instances of Wikipedia articles being factually incorrect or simply fabricated, and there are more than a few. But that would not be very productive in this context. But there is something that Eric fails to mention, for whatever reason, and that is, there is an obvious conflict of interest between the two organisations. What he fails to mention in his video is that the founder of Wikipedia, Jimmy Wales, sits on the board of a rival newspaper, The Guardian. a direct commercial rival of the Mail, and Wales is not shy in his criticism of the Mail, so the founder of Wikipedia can hardly be described as a disinterested party in these matters. And when we view the Wikipedia editor's thread where the prohibition was first discussed, the proposer for the prohibition specifically cites the opinions expressed by Jimmy Wales relating to the Mail as part of his justification. So we have a bit of a mystery on our hands, don't we? As Eric has said, RT and Fox News are still regarded as legitimate news sources, but the Mail is not. I'm sure the fact that RT or Fox are not commercial rivals to an organisation in which Jimmy Wales has an interest is purely coincidental. But really, Eric, Wikipedia. Now come on, why didn't you throw in some good old statistics or something? You know, facts instead of feelings. We all know you really don't like the Mail, but that in itself is not a persuasive argument, is it? And poisoning the well, it's only effective if your antagonist's argument rests on that single source. But the BMA story was carried by multiple news outlets and publications, including the Daily Mirror, which has a left-wing editorial bias. I know that Baring cited the Daily Mail Australia edition, but he could just as well have used the Mirror, the Standard or the Telegraph. Your argument in this respect is clumsy and ill-considered. If you wish to use arguments based on informal fallacies, at least deploy them when they're likely to be effective. Before we leave this section, let's consider what Orwell himself had to say on the matter of newspapers and reliability. So, armed with that fragment of wisdom, let's move on.
Video by neolplum, which was a response of sorts to a Baring video that I hadn't watched at the time, named UK Medical Association bans the word mother.
Don't call pregnant patients mothers. Doctors are banned from using the word over fears it will upset those who are transgender. Official guidelines issued by the British Medical Association says mothers-to-be should be referred to as pregnant people. See what I mean? It's just so inclusive. It's fucking heartwarming.
Reactionary sarcasm aside, the first thing I wondered was whether the source on which both their videos was based was reliable. neolplum kindly left a link to a Daily Mail article whose text Baring had basically transposed from written form into a video representation of his own views. The piece injected the usual themes popular among Daily Mail readers and YouTube anti-SJWs. Political correctness, and transgender issues, etc. Seems a bit drastic, was my first response. My second was to search for the devil in the detail, to see whether the Daily Mail had a real story in the text. My skeptic senses were already tingling about the alleged ban. The Mail's body contradicted the headline, since it explained that the BMA was only advising its employees to adopt language that would be least likely to cause offence to those they came into contact with. There was no evidence any ban existed. This seemed very familiar, and then I remembered that almost exactly the same thing happened in another case, where an anti-feminist, Karen Strawn, used the Daily Mail as a source to support her argument in a video response she made to me. Karen claimed that judges had been ordered or mandated to discriminate in favour of female offenders based on a Daily Mail headline. After 5 minutes or so of research, I discovered that changes have been made to the British Equal Treatment Bench Book, a book that judges can refer to for advice. The supposed order was a lie, just as the ban was in this case. And in both cases we had anti-feminists re-reporting lies to their audiences as a means to back up their pre-existing narrative, a staple of their YouTube brand.
So Eric, after 5 minutes of research, concludes that a bench book is simply another guide sat on the bookshelf in judges' chambers. But let's consider what these bench books are and what they're used for, before jumping to any unwarranted conclusions. Each court will have its bench book, magistrates' courts, crown courts, civil courts, juvenile courts, and so on. Each bench guide will determine court procedures, relevant points of law, and so on. While these books are not law, they do determine procedure within the courts. And if we look at a typical example contained within the Queen's Bench Guide, we see the following statement in section 113. 113 states the following. The guide does not have the force of law, but parties using the Queen's Bench division will be expected to act in accordance with this guide. So, these books dismissed simply as books that a judge might look at for advice do in fact mandate. They determine the conduct of the court. If, for instance, the bench book determines that A and B will be the proper course to take, but not C, then the expectation of all parties is that C is no longer procedurally legitimate. Does this constitute a ban or a prohibition? Well, legally, no. But if somebody mistakes it for a prohibition, is it reasonable to call them a liar, when in fact all they're guilty of is failing to apply a correct term to a subtle legal distinction? In our example, C will be excluded regardless of whether we describe its exclusion as a prohibition or a ban or not. In simple terms, these bench guides are not as described by Eric. They are not simply a book sat on a shelf that a judge might turn to for advice. This is a somewhat misleading statement. They are not merely advisory in nature. They determine the conduct of proceedings within the courts. So if someone mistakes this somewhat nuanced distinction incorrectly, they are not guilty of dishonesty. A lie requires the intent to deceive. Eric has provided no evidence to support the accusation of dishonesty. He simply asserts it. It would be unfounded even if the substantive argument was in fact valid, which in relation to bench guides, it almost certainly is not.
The next step was to corroborate or to throw out the other claims made in the Mail piece, repeated by Baring.
Get a load of this shit I found on the Daily Mail's website.
A simple search using the keywords BMA Guide to Effective Communication gave me all the results I needed. At the bottom of page 11 of an advisory booklet published almost a year ago, we can see the reason why the Daily Mail, The Sun, Fox News and the Daily Telegraph ran with the story. Must have been a slow news day, eh, chaps, to scrape that old fish and chip wrapper out of the basket and dress it up as headline news. Less clear was to whom this written advice was being provided to.
775,000 women give birth in Britain every year. Doctors now have to refer to all those expectant mothers as pregnant people, to spare the feelings of transgender people who may become pregnant. Never mind the fact that there's been a grand total of 1 so far.
Another few strokes of the keyboard, and this in the Daily Telegraph's report. A BMA spokesman said, "This is a guide for BMA staff and representatives aimed at promoting an inclusive workplace at the BMA. It is not workplace guidance for doctors, which is clear from the fact it does not refer to patients." We can quibble about the definition of fake news, but the Daily Mail's lead was clearly false.
Now, it must have been at this point that Eric's skepticism failed, because often organisations faced with controversy engage in damage limitation. So maybe we might want to investigate beyond superficial press statements. There are several questions that we might ask ourselves in relation to this matter. Firstly, does the statement by the BMA actually make sense in the light of the document itself? So maybe we should take a look at the document, which as it turns out is somewhat ambiguous, which is a little concerning given the topic it seeks to offer guidance on. Now a question. Who are the members of the BMA? It's not a trick question, its members are doctors. So when we read in the first sentence of the opening paragraph in the document, a guide to effective communications, the following, and I quote, "We are committed to promoting equal rights and opportunities, supporting diversity, and creating an open and inclusive environment for our members, employees, and stakeholders." Now we understand that doctors themselves are considered to fall within the purview of this guidance. But what about patients? Because it is patients that is the contentious issue. Well, let's have a look at the communication section of the BMA website itself. The introduction states, and I quote, "Good communication skills are essential component of doctor-patient relationship." So this section is most definitely relating to doctor-patient communications. And if we look at the bottom of this particular section, we find, under further reading, 2 references titled Guide to Effective Communication Skills. In this case, the guides are for 2004-2006. So the claim by the BMA press release that such guides are only for the guidance of BMA employees is in fact disingenuous at best. In fact, the press release seems to have been intended to mislead. But as we pride ourselves on being skeptics, they stood little chance of slipping that one past us, did they, Eric? Anyway, we'll end our adventure together at this point, but before we go, I did promise to drop a few Orwellian quotes. So this one is for you, Eric. Enjoy.